Letter number 9. IDF informants. Defining victims is not simple in a setting where violence is dispensed wholesale. There is, for instance, the death of Muhammad Hilal, described in the International Herald Tribune of November 29, 2003. A peculiar family photo first draws the reader's attention. 3 women and a male appear. The older woman in the middle is presumably the mother of the younger 3. Each of the women holds a photograph of a young man missing from the ensemble. The caption identifies the person in the pictures held by the women as Muhammad Hilal, age 23. One of the images shows Hilal with a stylish post-teen mop of curls atop his head, ringed by shaven sides. He could be one of hundreds I see on a typical weekend in Palestinian town centers. The photo caption states antiseptically that Hilal, accused of being an informer, he was killed by Palestinian militants. If the count by a West Bank journalist is accurate, Hilal is one of 70 similarly executed since 2000. Their deaths are not normally accompanied by spectacle, but shortly before his body was thrown in an alleyway, a gathering in the center of Tulkarm refugee camp watched Hilal confess on a video screen. On the tape, Hilal tells Palestinian interrogators how the Israelis recruited him. He says that, rejected when seeking a travel permit for his mother, he was taken to a room where there was a woman in an Israeli army uniform. She asked me what I thought of the Palestinian uprising. She put one hand on my shoulder and one on my leg and started to rub. Then she took off all her clothes. When I saw her naked like that, I had to have sex. Afterward, according to Hilal's declarations, an Israeli officer showed him 15 photos of the sexual encounter. The officers threatened that if Hilal did not work with Shin Bet, the Israeli intelligence organization, then the photos would be handed out in Tulkarm. Upon yielding, Hilal says he received about $70 and several telephone numbers. Hilal then states he went on to the clashes and later gave the Israelis 3 reports with names. One of the indistinct photographs of Hilal seems to show him with an automatic weapon proudly slung across his arm. Another time, Hilal says he identified an explosives expert who had 19 bombs. For this he won high praise, he declares. Shin Bet, as customary, provided no comment to the allegation it uses entrapment, like that described by Hilal. But such narratives are not new. Since the 1970s, collaborators have told of sexual episodes employed in recruitment. Without corroboration, however, it is hard to know whether the stories are not fabrications, or alternatively exaggerations, conceived by informers as an excuse more acceptable than taking money, or perhaps even a defense rehearsed for them by Shin Bet. Presumably, its Palestinian screeners want the Tulkarm open-air showing to disabuse any misapprehensions on this score. Using sex in suborning informers doesn't occur in a vacuum. Shin Bet, hard-pressed to thwart suicide bombers, like any intelligence service, looks to exploit susceptibilities. Payment of money in a wrecked economy, even a small sum like that given to Hilal, is reportedly common. Entrapment of homosexuals is another method. Threatened exposure works an enormously coercive force upon a young man in deeply conservative Palestinian society. Claiming entrapment by a woman would also be preferable to other sources of sexual blackmail. Travel permits, reduction of jail sentences, issuances of a taxi license, a host of arbitrarily granted favors are powerful inducements among a defenseless population. Hilal's mother, Mezuzah, insists her son was not an informer. The Herald Tribune describes an album of photographs shown to a New York Times reporter. Pictures of Hilal's body reveal burn marks over his corpse. Mezuzah says this is evidence he was tortured by Aqsa Martyrs Brigade vigilantes into making the videotaped confession. This is all remaining to be claimed on Hilal's behalf. When it comes to stopping suicide bombings, Israel insists there is no substitute for informers. Ezra Gideon, a former Shin Bet official now serving in Sharon's cabinet, was willing to be quoted. "You are not fighting tanks, you are fighting individuals. The minute a suicide bomber has a bomb, he is a weapon that is already in flight. Only good and accurate information can stop him." When reading about the almost daily Israeli raids into densely populated Palestinian towns, or witnessing the charred remnants of a vehicle destroyed by a rocket from an Apache helicopter, one assumes the product of Shin Bet's human intelligence is being exploited. Though the rules of war, Americans are now fully apprised, do not countenance unlawful combatants, there seems to be no proscription against recruiting them. To the contrary, the spies for our side are lauded and decorated as heroes, though the enemies receive not even the minimal protections afforded prisoners of war. This much today seems ho-hum. But apart from the law, should the moral dimension be explored, especially when the disparity of power between Israel and the Palestinians is so extreme? What limitations, if any, might morality impose upon recruitment and manipulation of informers from a population made vulnerable by 36 years of occupation, when it is known that suspected informers will inevitably be tortured and killed by self-appointed executioners, when enemy tactics make no distinction between military and civilian targets, when lethal violence strikes by stealth without warning? The visages of Hilal's family, sadly defiant, their hands thrusting his image at the camera, ask these questions.